Joe Rogan, famed UFC commentator and host of the wildly successful podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, has come under fire for discussing controversial topics, including inflammatory rhetoric and sometimes COVID-19 skepticism, in addition to interviewing equally controversial guests.
Well, a new survey from Morning Consult hints that perhaps politicians shouldn't be focusing so much on his content, but rather on his 12 million and counting subscribers. The survey revealed almost half of those polled who identify as, quote, avid fans of Rogan also lean Republican, but less than half of that voted for Trump in 2020. And men tend to be big fans of Rogan as compared to women. Kim Iverson aside.
Here to parse through this latest research is Eli Yokley, a senior politics reporter at Morning Consult. Eli, welcome.
Good to be here.
And Eli, among the arguments I've made around this has kind of been central to it, which is that if he has 11 or 12 million viewers, even if you don't like him, even grant that, there's still an opportunity to reach millions of impressionable people. And I think impressionable is key because it's hard in our media environment to find a lot of people who haven't already made their minds up on a particular issue. And it's fine to talk to those audiences, but you're not going to move them one way or another. What's your sense of how movable his audience is?
Well, about half of them voted for Trump. That means the other half didn't. And a good chunk of those Americans didn't participate in the electoral process at all. I mean, this is what looks like an untapped audience. A good chunk of them are men, almost most of them are men, and a lot of them are really young. And look, I mean, Democrats in the last election did pretty okay with men. But they need to continue that. And politics is won on the margins. And whenever you have what is almost 11 million fans and counting, and that's just the folks who listen to his podcast, not the ones who follow him and other mediums who were part of this survey. That's a good chunk of the American people that is sort of being ignored by the political process, or is at least ignoring the political process back.
Yeah, and the mainstream media, in many cases, will treat Joe Rogan like some kind of plague to be gotten rid of. And again, that can be your attitude, that he's just very bad and very toxic, but I think you risk, and this is kind of what you're pointing out here in looking at the demographics of his listeners, you risk alienating a really massive chunk of people, or making those people feel that, well, if liberals, if the mainstream media, if Democratic politicians are demonizing me, then I guess maybe I do just then identify as a Republican, and it's a very pushing away kind of approach.
Yeah, I mean, this is not the audience of Fox News at night. This is not the audience of Nicole Wallace, the MSNBC mom. This is a group of Americans who seems to be rather politically disengaged. Almost 3 in 10 of them didn't vote in the last election. And so, yeah, that's why you saw in the last contest, Bernie Sanders went on there and spoke to his audience for about an hour, and Bernie Sanders loved the interview. Andrew Yang went on there, and for the first time, very early in his campaign, and it helped him raise a ton of money, got him a lot of attention. They got him on the debate stage. These are people who are receptive to messages, and right now they're just not hearing a lot of it from the left. That's why it was such a big deal when Dr. Sanjay Gupta of CNN went on there and talked about vaccines. This is an audience that is listening to these conversations, and if they're only getting their cultural commentary from commentators on their right, whether it be on Joe Rogan or on some of the Barstool platforms online, it's no wonder that Democrats have not performed well with them. But it is an opportunity. There's opportunity in this group for both sides.
What's really interesting, you bringing up these political candidates that were on Joe's show, is he's been a fan, and I believe even maybe voted, if I recall, for Bernie Sanders, who's a big fan of Tulsi Gabbard, a lot of Democrats. So it's really interesting to see that much of his audience, 54% that were Republicans, so about half are Republicans, but the other half are independent and Democrat. So there's certainly an audience to tap in there. But what's interesting is that with him still supporting Democrat candidates, he's got this big Republican audience, half, or a little more than half, and yet they haven't canceled him. What do you make of that?
I mean, I think a good chunk of these folks are politically disengaged to begin with. And so bringing Democrats on, the kind of Democrats he's brought on, by the way, folks like Bernie Sanders have had reach in some of these more conservative communities. Tulsi Gabbard I mean, that's a whole can of worms in politics, but she's on Fox News every night almost, it seems. Andrew Yang is sort of a different kind of political candidate that was able to reach out to this audience. This is not an audience that seems to be striving for Mitt Romney every day. I mean, it's an audience that seems to be on sort of the new growing part of politics that both parties seem to be not totally leaning into today.
And can you also talk a little bit about both the class, race, and like ethnicity demographics that you found among Rogan's listeners?
Yeah, well, a lot of his listeners are white. That is a pretty clear fact in this finding. But compared to folks who don't listen, there was a pretty significant size of Hispanic voter Americans who make up his audience. And when you think about places where Democrats struggled in 2020, I mean, the Hispanic American population is one that was definitely a weak spot, where Republicans even saw some gains in places like Florida. These are voters that seem to be open to moving their postures and are ready to be tapped into, and a good chunk of them at least are listening to Joe Rogan.
Yeah, and how does it compare to the overall population? It seems, this would be significantly because of the age of his listenership, but it seems in some ways disproportionately Hispanic relative to the rest of the population. Is that right?
Yeah, that's for sure. If we compared it to non-Rogan fans in our analysis, but it was a pretty sizable gap when almost a quarter of Joe Rogan's fan base is Hispanic. That is certainly outside the norm of a lot of different audiences.
And what about on the class front? Because my theory on this has always been that people who work in the quote unquote knowledge economy aren't able to multitask. They're not able to listen to a 3-hour podcast while they're also having to be in a Zoom meeting, for instance. Whereas if you're an Uber driver, you work in a kitchen, you work on a construction site, you can actually multitask. If you've got window time, you need something to kill that window time, and nothing better than a 3 or 4 hour podcast. So what did you find when it came to the class demographics of his listenership?
So you're telling your editors you don't listen to podcasts at work. That is reaching out. About 7 in 10 of them are less than college educated, give or take. It's actually not a big gap between the audience of non-fans that we surveyed. And so there did not seem to be, in our numbers at least, a big class difference. There were small, sort of along the margins differences when it comes to income. But in terms of like education level, these Rogan voters seem to look a lot like the folks who don't listen to Joe Rogan. They're just a lot younger. I mean, that's the big difference here. Is this is just a very young, predominantly male audience that sort of goes across the spectrum of class and income in American politics.
Do we say how old they are? How young?
Most of them are under the age of 45. So this is
We're still young, right?
Yeah,
We're still considered
young.
young.
We're still young. That's right.
Well, I don't have time to listen to a 3-hour podcast every day, but we listen to the highlights of Rogan when we play them on our show, and that's enough Rogan content for us. But Eli, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, anytime.
Tomorrow on Rising, we have another great show for you, but sadly, it will be Kim's last day in the studio tomorrow.
Great to have you here.
So she'll still be with us tomorrow.
Yeah, well, and I'll see you guys just in my normal form,
And Friday,
digital.
which is totally taped on Friday.
Right.
Don't forget that.
Kim gave away the game. She told the audience once that it's not a live show on Friday.
I think they figured.
But I think we
out.
are doing some live content.
You guys
on
are.
Friday.
I think
Someone
I'm
is.
going to be.
We're
I'm
gonna.
going to be sleeping and.
Okay, I'll be here Friday.
Because this is early for me being here. You
Yeah.
know, this is like I'm on LA time still, but waking up bright and early here. So
It's like 7:15 for you now.
right now at this time, yeah, wow. It's
Brutal.
still early. Well, and then we had the time change, so I'm actually even because I haven't adjusted for that
6:15
either.
for you.
So yeah.
Permanent daylight savings time.
Congratulations, everybody. We did it.
Yeah, all right. Well, this has been definitely a lot of fun. So I'll be here tomorrow. And you guys be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a video. And if you're more of a podcast fan, of course, look at us. We're so cool. Yeah. We're available wherever you listen to podcasts. So be sure to do that. Spotify, iHeart, where do people do? iTunes, all over the place. So, all right. Thank you so much
Stitcher.
for watching.
It's on Stitcher.
Yeah, Stitcher, right. All right. Bye-bye.